Hello and welcome to Weird Careers. I'm your host, Eric, but you can call me ET. All over the world, people have jobs, and some of those jobs we don't even know exist. There are jobs that we don't know a lot about, and there are jobs that we just don't talk about. Well, I'm here to explore all of the above in this podcast. I will be interviewing people from all over the world about their strange and interesting careers. Everything from cosplay to sex work. Oh, did I mention this show is 18 plus? Over the course of this season, we will talk to people in all sorts of fields of work and dive deep into their profession. Also, if you think you have a weird career, let us know at eric@cardinalimages.ca. This show is brought to you in part by Cardinal Images. Get your business looking amazing at a great price. Check out their website at www.cardinalimages.ca for their gallery and quotes. On today's show, we have Connell Miller, who, I guess you could say, is the Sherlock Holmes of tornadoes. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Connell Miller.
Thanks for having me. Sherlock Holmes of tornadoes. That's a new one. We've got a couple funny names for what we do around the office. There's post-tornado chasers. There's tornado detectives. Sherlock Holmes of tornadoes. That's a new one, though.
Oh, well, maybe it'll stick. You never know. Yeah. So tell me, what exactly is your job title?
So technically, I'm a research engineer for the Northern Tornadoes Project. And the Northern Tornadoes Project essentially aims to better detect tornado occurrence throughout Canada, improve severe and extreme weather prediction, mitigate against damage to people and property, and investigate future implications due to climate change.
That's a lot in one breath there.
Yeah.
Explain some of that stuff there. Like the last one that really caught my attention was the effects it has on climate change. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, sure. So first, I'll just say in sort of the simplest terms, my job specifically is to go to areas across Canada that have been affected by tornadoes and to sort of assess that damage and classify the strength of the tornado or storm based on that damage. Like when you see the news on tornadoes, you tend to see like what their rating is, like EF1, EF2. Have you sort of seen those before?
Yeah, of course. Always seeing the F3, 4, 5, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, so that's essentially what my job is, because we don't get those wind speeds based off like radar or like wind speed measures in the area. Oh. It's all based off the damage that the storm creates. So if it's like, let's say an EF3 storm, it tends to be like roofs are blown off, that sort of thing, right? So that's what sort of the damage is what classifies the strength of the storm and not the wind speed itself. We just infer the wind speed based off the damage. So that's what my job is to go out and to figure out what damage was caused and use that to infer what the wind speed was and give it a classification. Now, in terms of like future implications of climate change, that one's a bit trickier because we're still trying to get better at actually detecting tornadoes in Canada. Before we started this, it's the problem that Canada has a pretty low population density. So it's the question of if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, do you classify it as a tornado, right? So before we were only like Environment Canada was only detecting about 60 tornadoes in Canada per year. Our modeling has shown that number could be as high as 200 to 300.
Oh, wow.
So it's our job in the last couple of years is to try to improve the detection rate. And once we improve the detection rate, hopefully we can start getting what the future implications of climate change are. Because yes, we are detecting more tornadoes over the last couple of years, but that's just because we're getting better at detecting the tornadoes. So we're hoping once we get really good at detecting the tornadoes, then we can start to discuss maybe what the future implications of climate change are on tornado occurrence and intensity.
Wow, who would have thought that the size or magnitude of a tornado could show implications of climate change?
Yeah, for sure. That's sort of like the huge question looming in the background, right? That's like the final goal, right? So we've got a lot to do before we get there, but it's always sort of in the back of our head.
So your current job takes you to the post-storm sites. Have you ever been in an active storm?
Yep. I actually had the chance to storm chase a bit last year with some of the members of the Weather Network in the Calgary area. And we do really rely on data gathered by storm chasers on tornadoes that touch down. They tend to post it all over social media, which is fantastic for us in sort of the detection of these tornadoes.
Nice.
So I am personally hoping to try it more and more often as I get further into this job. But I would like to get more experience with meteorology first, because it can be like quite dangerous to do. Like right now, I wouldn't feel comfortable going out by myself without a trained meteorologist there. Storm chasers, even like the most experienced ones, have been killed before because storms can make such unexpected turns, right? And if you don't have that knowledge of the science behind it, it can be a very dangerous thing to do. So I'm hoping to get out more as I learn more about the meteorology of these things. But yeah, I've gone out a few times already with trained professionals, I'll say.
Right on, right on. So you said that you would feel uncomfortable going out to these storm sites without a meteorologist. What would the meteorologist have that you don't have, or what kind of insight can they provide?
Well, they're very good at detecting where storms are going to be. So that's very helpful if you're trying to chase it, right? And B, just sort of how far away you need to be to still remain safe, and any potential path that storm might take. So a lot of these storm chasers have like full degrees in meteorology, or just a breadth of experience in storm chasing that I just don't have, right? So I'll stick to sort of the detective work that happens after, where I'm not in an active risk of a tornado for now. But again, I would like to get better. It is a cool aspect of it, right? But,
well, of course. I mean, we have all seen Twister and all those movies that have these great, incredible Twister. I mean, we've also seen The Wizard of Oz. Thank God that special effects have improved since then.
I don't know. I still think Wizard of Oz holds up a bit. They didn't try to. It's not on my worst list of bad CGI tornadoes.
Well, what would you say would be a really bad one then?
Sharknado is very high up there in terms of like entertainment value, top notch, 100% entertainment value. CGI quality, absolutely terrible.
Well, every time you talk about your job, you get excited. So could you tell me more about how you got into your career?
I mean, I honestly just sort of stumbled into it. There was no like defining moment in my life that was like, oh, I got caught in a tornado when I was a child, and ever since then I wanted to research and study them. Western University is just really world renowned for their wind engineering program. They built the first boundary layer wind tunnel for structures and tested things like the CN Tower, the Spears Tower, Confederation Bridge. So they were the first ones to ever do any sort of structural wind testing on these things. So as an undergraduate student at Western, you get a lot of exposure to courses revolving around that you wouldn't necessarily get at any other engineering program. Yep. And it just sort of really sparked my interest. I would say, especially in the summer between my third and fourth year, I actually signed up for a research fellowship on a wind engineering project. And that's when I actually started going out on these damage surveys. They said, hey, we just need an extra set of hands. Can you come out and help us? Back then, the Northern Tornadoes Project didn't even exist. It was just sort of, we were doing it as an extension of Environment Canada. So Environment Canada would sort of get our help with the engineering side of things. And now here we are later, a more sort of bigger organization, 6 years later, still doing it.
So are you employed by a company, or how does that work?
I am technically employed as a contract employee for Western University.
Oh, okay. So when you apply for jobs outside of the Western University umbrella, do you go to like Indeed or something?
I would say, yeah, it's hard. Applying for jobs like this, having some sort of knowledge of meteorology or wind engineering, what I would say is the biggest step. So that's sort of the route I would say to take for if you want to try to get a job in these sort of things, or just find an experienced storm chaser and get them to take you under their wing if that's the route you want to go down, I suppose. Right on,
right on. So you mentioned you went to Western for this. So how did this program teach you, and how did it prepare you for the real world?
So initially at Western, I did a bachelor in structural engineering, which was a 4-year program. And that sort of really dealt with the fundamentals of engineering and material science with some small exposure to wind engineering. But then it was sort of when I got into my PhD in wind engineering specifically, which for me was a 5-year program. You start to take more specific courses like atmospheric physics, boundary layer meteorology, risk modeling, statistics. You have to publish a thesis, and mine had to do with the codification of wind loads on cladding, essentially trying to protect your house from these tornadic effects. And that's sort of all led me down the road to this job, I suppose.
Nice. That's quite the journey that you've taken on so far.
Yeah, it's a lot of school. It's honestly, I didn't want to go to med school because I was like, oh, I don't want to be in school for 9 or 10 years. And then it just, here I am.
So how many years was your program?
So 4 years for bachelor's and then 5 years for the PhD. So I was in university for 9 years total.
So about the same time as becoming a doctor anyway.
Yeah. I didn't have to do the residency at least, which would be another couple of years. But yeah, I could have gone through med school, maybe even faster, because I think med school is just the 4-year bachelor and then the 4 years of med school. So I could have been 8 years of med school instead
darn.
of.
Did you pick the wrong field?
No. I'm much more suited to this.
So tell me, what is your favorite part about the job?
So I would say 2 big things. One, it's a weird way, but a really cool way to see Canada. It's sort of unconventional, but you do get to go to these sort of like rural spots that you would never even think about going to normally. Like I've been to middle of nowhere, Northwest Territories, all over Alberta, weird spots in Manitoba. Northern Quebec, that sort of thing, right? So it's a really cool way to see Canada. The other second thing, besides doing the damage surveys, sort of my main role in the Northern Tornadoes Project is to lead the development of our drone program. And what that means is using drones to help gather aerial photography to make these sort of maps of the tornado damage, as well as do like 3D reconstructions of the damaged area and that sort of thing. So I get to fly drones a lot. I get to research what technology would suit us best for like our applications and learn how to fly some really cool stuff. So I would say those are the 2 big things that I love about my job. So
you said you've been doing this for about 9 years or so. Obviously drones weren't around 9 years ago. How has that part of the job changed?
So we started using drones in 2018 and it's amazing how fast the technology has advanced on that, right? Mm-hmm. You see all these media personalities, like if you look at YouTube or that using like the drones as part of their videography. And that's one use of it. And we're using it more as a tool to sort of be able to quickly analyze damage, right? Because if you can launch a drone up the air and get all of these pictures, it's very quickly easy to tell you what's the length of the tornado, what's the width of the tornado, how many trees in a certain area are down, without having to physically walk that distance and measure that distance, right? So it's really sort of sped up our process and really impacted the sort of data that we can publish. And all of our data is actually publicly accessible. If you go to our website, uwo.ca/NTP, you can take a look at all of the maps of the tornado surveys that we've been on. It's free for the public. We're sort of committed to open access data in that way. Cool.
So to all of our listeners, we'll make sure to have a link to that in the description below. So those are all the pros. What about the cons?
The biggest con I can think of with this job is the very erratic schedule during tornado season.
Oh, yeah?
You can be called out to a damage survey with essentially no notice, and you have to sort of drop everything and go. It sort of means I don't get summer vacation whatsoever. I can't really do anything in the summer because I have to be ready to go regardless of whether it's a weekend, regardless of whether it's Canada Day, to any tornado site damage from the months of like May to September. So like, for example, there was one morning I came into the office at 8 a.m. and I got a text that says, "Hey, we need you in the Northwest Territories. Your flight leaves at noon." And then, I had to be ready and packed and run to the Toronto airport. Right. And it was just, so stuff like that, I would say, is the biggest con.
So we talked about movies earlier. So how accurate is the movie Twister? And have you ever seen a flying cow?
I have never seen a flying cow in person, but it does happen. Specifically, I went to a damage survey site in Carmangay, Alberta last year, where a dog and a calf, I believe, were sucked up by the tornado. And I can't remember how far they were launched, but at least a couple hundred meters away. All animals were 100% fine. They all returned home to their proper owners.
Incredible.
It ended up being a really good story. So I've never seen one personally live, but I have seen sort of the impacts. It does happen. In terms of the movie Twister, they do a couple things right. Sort of a lot of the technical talk they say is actually spot on. Stuff like the wind shears veering, cap breaking, that all happens. And they sort of over dramatize it a bit, but sort of the science versus money aspect of storm chasing does exist to some extent. Definitely not to the extent that they sort of base the whole movie around, but it does exist. The big things that they got wrong, they always say they looked at a tornado and they say, "Oh, it's an EF5 tornado." No, you can't know the strength of a tornado just by looking at it, right? And meteorologists can't predict the strength of a tornado either. It's, again, based off the damage it produces. So you have to wait till after the tornado has gone through.
So that's essentially where your job comes in.
That is essentially where my job comes in. So I like to nitpick on that a little bit. The other thing is,
I understand that.
The other thing is tornado outbreaks don't last all night. They're sort of fueled by heat, right? So they usually wane through the night. So if there is a tornado outbreak, it can start up again the next afternoon, but it generally won't go overnight.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
And the last thing I'll just mention is they hide in the worst spots in that movie. I think they hide under a bridge at one point, and then after they hide in like a big hangar at another point. Don't do that. Go find a basement. Go find a stable structure that's made of concrete. Go in the basement and hide there. Don't hide under a bridge where you could be hit by debris.
Well, isn't that what the Weather Network tells us anyways?
Yeah, exactly. So just small stuff like that. But I will say Twister is probably still the best tornado movie.
Right on. So you've mentioned some crazy days at work where you've literally had a few hours notice to go to the Northwest Territories. So is that one of your craziest days, or do you have something a little more?
I would say probably the craziest day on the job was when I had to go survey the EF4 tornado in Alonsa, Manitoba last year. It was not only the biggest tornado in Canada, it was actually the biggest tornado in North America.
Oh, wow.
That year. So crazy day. It was more like crazy days because it sort of took multiple days to go through it. It was the first damage survey that had been on that had a fatality associated with it. So it was a bit tough sort of dealing with the ramifications of that. And just it was a lot of damage to process, a lot of people who lost essentially everything, right? So I would say that's probably the craziest day, just trying to emotionally deal with all of that while still trying to get data to maybe help improve building standards or tornado detection warnings so that maybe we do better the next time.
Geez, well, that sounds horrific.
I know, not to sort of be a bit of a downer there, but tornadoes are a serious thing, and they do impact numerous lives every year.
Well, that's the one thing people like myself who are fascinated by storms from afar seems to forget sometimes, that there are fatalities involved with these gigantic storms.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's definitely, I guess I see it all the time. Right. And, I guess it's sort of, again, the aim of this is to not only provide engineering data, for like how it affects the structures, but also to provide, data for anthropologists and sociologists. And we actually have some working on the project to help improve sort of how do people react to tornado warnings, how do people react to sort of not getting tornado warnings, and that sort of thing, right?
Oh wow, that's pretty cool. So one more question I just wanted to ask you before we go: if there's somebody that is listening to this podcast who wants to get into this field, is there anything that you recommend to this person?
I would say, if this is your passion, for sure, I would say, again, there's two routes you can go down. If you're interested in sort of the detection of storms, and sort of the forecasting element of it, go look into meteorology. I know York University has a fantastic meteorology program. I believe there's one out in Manitoba as well. I look into that. If you're interested in sort of the structural impact and the more engineering side, come to Western University, come take some of these wind engineering courses and see what you think of it. And if that's not your thing, if you don't want to go through a whole 4-year degree for this, citizen scientists are incredibly important. We rely on data from Twitter and Facebook so much. So if you see anything from the storms, or if you happen to be out there taking a look at it, use the hashtags that are typically used. So that would be hashtag the first 2 letters of your province. So if you're Ontario, it would be ON, and then storm. So if you use that, we'll see it. All of the storm chasers will see it. And citizen scientists, especially in the time of this COVID-19 pandemic where we can't be physically everywhere at once, is just so crucial.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Connell, for coming on today's show. And listeners, remember, if you know somebody with a weird career, contact us at eric@cardinalimages.ca. Again, Connell, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hey, it was a pleasure being here.
Awesome. Take care now.
Yeah, you too.
Coming up next week, we have Sith Jade, who's a sex worker, and to talk about the day-to-day activities and the day-to-day life that she has as a sex worker. All this and more coming up next time on Weird Careers. I'm your host, E.T. Thanks for listening.